I loved Troy madly for half my life, and after getting out of prison, I finally filed for divorce. Because after my sister falsely accused me of pushing her down the stairs, Troy chose to send me to prison to undergo reformation, to get rid of those bad temperaments you had before. After 3 years of torment in prison that felt worse than death, I changed. I got rid of my crazy love for Troy and dared not approach him even a step. But when I filed for divorce, he panicked. On the day I was released from prison, the sky was particularly gloomy, as if it could crush my entire world. The cold iron door of the prison slowly opened, and outside, reporters and haters had been waiting for a long time, like hungry wolves, eager to come and tear me to pieces. In the crowd, someone mocked loudly. "What goes around comes around, does heaven spare anyone?" In the past, Lora relied on the powerful Luo family to act recklessly and do as she pleased. Even after the Luo family went bankrupt, she still showed no signs of restraint. It seems she has finally received her comeuppance. To dare to push her pregnant sister down the stairs, this malicious woman deserves more than just 3 years. Countless media outlets surrounded me with cameras and microphones, the sharp attacks and insults from the onlookers echoing in my ears, squeezing me until I could hardly breathe. It felt as if I had returned to the suffocating prison, surrounded by a group of vicious inmates who, like demons, beat me mercilessly, becoming a nightmare that I could never shake off. Compared to these cruel inmates and the acerbic reporters, my husband Troy and my sister Vera are the true executioners. They are the ones who sent me to prison with their own hands, destroying the once bright and flamboyant princess of the Luo family. Soon, a row of well-trained bodyguards parted the crowd, escorting that man who sends chills down my spine. Troy, my former lover, my nominal husband, and the one who has hurt me the most. For years, I poured all my emotions into him, only to receive endless pain and humiliation in return. Seeing his familiar handsome face, my body involuntarily began to tremble. He wore the same expression of irritation and impatience as he did when I repeatedly went to the company to find him, cling to him, and pester him. He was just as impatient, commanding the bodyguards to throw me out, discarding me in front of everyone. When Troy saw me, he instinctively took a step back, his astonishment unmasked. But my heart was like still water. After 3 years of torment, all my sharp thorns had long been ruthlessly pulled out. The once radiant and proud little princess, after being tormented by these people, is now nothing more than a pitiful labor reform prisoner, trampled into the mud, someone everyone can step on a few times. In prison, the once pampered little princess learned to adapt to the cramped, simple bed and the rough, unbearable blue prison uniform. I could throw away all my self-respect, crawling like a dog, begging the big sister for a bit of spoiled or moldy food, and even to avoid a few kicks from them, I could kneel on the ground, bowing my head in supplication. It was just a week after entering prison that I noticed a few white hairs had appeared. Years have passed, and now half of my head is likely occupied by white hair. Coupled with long-term malnutrition, my body has become thin, yellowed, haggard, and showing signs of aging, so Troy's strange gaze at me is completely within my expectations. However, Troy in front of me is even more charming than 3 years ago. Dressed in a well-tailored Italian bespoke suit that highlights his tall figure, his face is exquisitely three-dimensional, and his long-standing high status has made his aura even stronger, forming a stark contrast to my current disheveled state. Perhaps sensing the complex and indescribable stench that enveloped me, he frowned and pinched his nose, asking discontentedly, "Lora, is there no bathroom in the prison?" I lowered my head, hiding my hands more tightly in my sleeves, remaining silent. I was indeed dirty and disheveled, and this would bring shame to the Lee family. I wondered if today's trending topics would include discussions about Troy's wife tarnishing the Lee family's image. I might not care about my own image, but Troy would certainly care about the Lee family's reputation. It wasn't that I didn't want to take a shower, but I simply had no strength, because just last night, I was bullied by those people again. The female leader of the prison learned that I was to be released early due to good behavior, and she ground her teeth in anger. She was afraid that I would expose her bullying after my release, so she blocked me with a few little followers. Toothpicks were jabbed into my fingers one by one, and she threatened fiercely, asking if I dared to speak out after getting out. I shook my head like a rattle drum, hoarsely pleading, I can't, I dare not. My tortured pleas became their most prized trophies. The more I held, the worse they beat me. In the end, I crawled back to my dormitory, my hands bloodied and bruised. After I remained silent for a long time, Troy, suppressing his discomfort, tried to pull me away. But just as his fingertips were about to touch me, I flinched away from his touch as if I had been electrocuted. Lora, what's wrong with you? A hint of surprise flickered in Troy's eyes. If he had been willing to touch me before, I would have been overjoyed. My current reaction made Troy feel unfamiliar. I avoided his gaze, my voice hoarse. It's nothing, Mr. Troy, let's go. What did you call me? Troy scolded softly, his voice laced with anger. This was the tone he would only use when he was very displeased, and it reminded me that there were media present. My way of addressing him had undermined his authority. But the man did not give me a chance to backtrack. In front of the media, he showed no restraint in his impatience. Troy frowned and shot me a glance before striding towards his understated yet luxurious black Maybach without looking back. With the heavy sound of the car door slamming shut, he left me with a cold remark, go take a shower in a public bathroom, then get a cab home. Once again, I was abandoned by Troy because he thought I would dirty his car. Once the luxury car from the Lee family drove away, I felt like a pitiful, stranded beast on a deserted island, surrounded by a pack of wolves, helpless and lost. The reporters' eyes were unfriendly, their dense and sharp questions like daggers, slowly cutting into the wounds deep within my heart. They wanted to know why I had so cruelly pushed my own sister Vera down, but I kept my lips tightly sealed, using silence as my only shield against the barrage of outside attacks. Because I knew that no one in this world would still believe me. Troy's cold and ruthless gaze constantly reminded me that any unnecessary excuses would become a reason for him to impose new punishments on me. After 3 years of hellish imprisonment, I had completely abandoned my former pride. I could only shrink into the sand like an ostrich, as evasion was my only choice. The reporter's encirclement was becoming increasingly suffocating, and just then, a man who looked mentally deranged squeezed into the crowd. Before I could clearly see his face, I felt a sharp pain on my head. A rotten egg had accurately hit me. The man was cursing incessantly, "You wicked woman. How dare you hurt my idol Vera?" At that moment, memories played back rapidly like a tape rewind. 3 years ago, the Lewell family went bankrupt, and both parents jumped from the building. Overnight, I went from being the beloved child of the Lewell family to the target of everyone's scorn. A massive debt loomed over me like a death sentence, pushing me to the brink of despair. Just as I was about to follow in my parents' footsteps and step onto the rooftop, Troy reached out to help me. He not only helped me pay off the debt but also married me. Meanwhile, my sister Vera was struggling in the cutthroat entertainment industry due to the downfall of the Lewell family. To make matters worse, her wealthy brother-in-law, upon learning of the Lewell family's plight, immediately kicked her out of the house while she was pregnant, leaving her as a discarded wife of a wealthy family. At the time, I was overjoyed to have just married Troy and welcomed my sister into our home, but I never expected her to harbor ill intentions towards him. She and Troy exchanged flirtatious glances right in front of me. Feeling wronged and furious, I confronted her, but what happened next is something I will never forget. When the crowd arrived, they saw my sister clutching her belly, lying helplessly in a pool of blood, crying out for help. Meanwhile, I was in a panic, wanting to help her, with my hands stained with bright red blood. From that moment on, I became the villain in everyone's eyes, the one who was so malicious that I caused the death of an innocent unborn baby and destroyed my own sister's happy life. Troy unceremoniously threw me into the police station, insisting that I undergo reformation to rid myself of these bad temperaments. What awaited me in prison was endless torment and humiliation. In the same cell, there were quite a few fans who had heard about Vera and me. They hurled insults at me and beat me. I found that as long as I pleaded with words promising not to entangle Troy again, their fists and feet would ease up a bit, allowing me to catch my breath. Back to reality, the stinky eggs were still stuck in my hair. Kneeling down and begging for mercy had become my instinctive reaction. I humbly pleaded, "Please don't hit me. Please don't hit me." The surrounding reporters, in shock, quickly reacted and pointed their cameras at this scene, as humble as a dog. Tears blurred my vision, but I still choked out a plea for mercy. I really can't cling to Troy anymore, I can't dare to do it again. I looked at the fan throwing eggs, my heart filled with fear. I was afraid he would attack me with fists and feet like those demons in prison, or even burn me little by little with a curling iron. That feeling of helplessness and the smell of burning at the tip of my nose is an unforgettable nightmare. I knelt on the ground, wanting to bow my head to him, just to seek a glimmer of hope. However, my surging tears, my desperate pleas, and the sound of my head knocking against the ground were all in vain. In this world, no one would care about the life or death of a vicious woman like me. Everyone leaned towards Vera, and now, even though she is not present, her shadow still deeply oppresses every breath I take. In my most desperate moment, a voice suddenly rang out from the crowd, "Enough." A tall figure pushed through the group of reporters. Before I could react, a well-proportioned hand appeared in front of me, warm and strong, supporting me. Could it be that someone was willing to lend me a hand? For a moment, I forgot my fear and looked up. Soren stood in front of me. He was my neighbor since childhood, my constant rival who always bickered with me yet frequently appeared in my life. Unlike the gentle and refined brothers of other families, our relationship was always filled with tension. He treated his sister with utmost politeness, while he never concealed his disdain for me, the little princess of the Luo family. However, at my most isolated and helpless moment, he appeared just in time. I mechanically watched him take off his coat and carefully drape it over my shoulders, his gaze firm and powerful. "Lora, I will take you home." Then, amidst the shocked and curious gazes of the media reporters, Soren helped me up and tightly held me in his arms as we broke through the crowd. The sense of security he gave me made me almost forget all the suffocating cameras and noisy sounds around us. Behind me, a familiar yet chilling voice shattered this peace. "Stop!" Troy shouted angrily. I didn't expect Troy to come back. Was he worried about me? That shouldn't be possible. He was just afraid I would embarrass the Lee family again. "Lora, you really have a talent." Troy's sarcasm was unrestrained, drawing Soren to become a chivalrous protector. His gaze was sharp as a knife, as if it could tear me into pieces. If looks could kill, I would have been dismembered 1,000 times over. "What? Don't think you can get away with silence." Troy's tone was biting. Soren sensed my tension and unease, transmitting subtle and complex emotional waves between us. He gently patted my back, trying to comfort me, and quickened his pace, wanting to take me away from this suffocating situation as soon as possible. "Lora, don't forget that you are still my nominal wife." Troy strode up. "Are you sure you want to follow Soren?" "Nominal wife," I couldn't help but feel a bit sad. "Yes, just nominally a wife, merely in name." It's laughable to think that after 3 years of marriage to Troy, I am still untouched. In those days after the wedding, he always found various reasons like working overtime to avoid me. Later, I was sent to prison by his own hands, so naturally, there was no chance for us to take that step together. "Soren, please put me down." I struggled, asking Soren to let me go. His eyes were filled with shock, but he reluctantly set me back on the ground, his gaze full of pain and confusion. My voice was hoarse yet firm. "I want to go back to the Lee family first." Troy laughed triumphantly, believing he had won this contest. "Soren, did you hear? Lora said she wants to go home with me." But he was too early in his joy. My next words struck like a heavy blow, shattering his pride. "I want to go back and divorce you." In that moment, Troy's smile froze on his face, while Soren silently looked at me, a flicker of complexity passing through his eyes. In fact, when I first entered prison, Troy's attorney visited me several times, stating that as long as I signed the divorce agreement, they would give me a large sum of compensation after my release. At that time, I was unwilling to accept it. I hadn't done anything wrong. Why should I meekly divorce Troy? As long as I didn't sign, I would still be Troy's wife, and I would never give Vera that position, even if it meant death. I wanted her to remain a hidden mistress until her dying day. But soon I regretted it. After a month of torment in prison, I felt like neither a person nor a ghost, with only one thought in my mind: to divorce Troy, to endure less beating, and to have enough to eat. Because I know that without Troy's indulgence and suggestion, the people in the prison wouldn't dare to treat me, Troy's wife, this way. He must be taking revenge on me for not signing the divorce agreement. I cried and begged him for another chance. I will sign immediately. But Troy sent someone to the prison to deliver the message. Now you regret it? It's too late. When I was punched and kicked, my hair pulled, and my head forced to drink that stuff, I completely lost the pride of being the little princess of the Luo family. Last night, those inmates were unusually harsh. Even after I begged 1,000 times to stop bothering Troy, they showed me no mercy, but instead treated me even worse. I whispered in pain, I want a divorce. Only then did they stop their actions, presumably at Troy's suggestion. Since that's the case, I will do as he wishes. Because long before he indiscriminately sent me to prison with his own hands, my heart had already died. The woman who once loved Troy madly has died in that prison, and now the only thing I want to do is to get a divorce as soon as possible. When he heard the word divorce, Troy clearly didn't react at first. He stood there in a daze, surely thinking he must have misheard. Troy clenched his fingers and spat out a few words through gritted teeth. Are you sure? I nodded seriously, word by word, I am sure. After Troy and I returned to the Lee family, Troy's dad and mom couldn't wait to see me. However, when they saw me, they instinctively took a step back, and the words of concern fell silent on their lips. Their gazes became complicated, like a spilled palette of paint, mixed with shock, heartache, and regret. Of course, I also cleverly caught a hint of disdain. Yes, that's right, disdain. After all, I was no longer the little princess of the Luo family, but a despised labor reform prisoner. At this moment, my hair was still coated with the stench of rotten egg liquid, my face was streaked with tears and snot, not yet dried, and my whole body emitted an indescribable odor that even I found repulsive. Troy's mother hesitated, finally frowning slightly, and ordered a servant to take me to wash up. They did not take me to the master bedroom, nor to the guest room. The new maid simply led me to a small, dark maid's room in the basement, coldly saying, "This young lady can handle herself here for now." Without waiting for my response, she unceremoniously shoved a set of maid's work clothes into my hands, saying, "Remember to put this on when you come out." I bitterly smiled to myself. 3 years had passed, and the maids of the Lee family had changed one batch after another. She had no idea that I had once been the mistress of this place. However, there was no need for her to know, because I soon would not be. Soaking in the small, warm bathtub, I shivered. When was the last time I felt this way? It had been so long that I was almost forgetting. For the first time, I didn't have to worry about someone suddenly knocking on the door and dragging me out of the bathroom to press me against the toilet. In this moment, I felt an unprecedented sense of relaxation as I watched the water slowly cover my skin, my body inevitably sinking into the warm water, as if I were sitting on a cloud. In a daze, I saw my parents, who looked at me with the same indulgent eyes as always, embracing all of me. After being imprisoned for so long, I almost forgot that I was once the little princess held dearly in my parents' hearts. I saw my parents reaching out to me with open arms, beaming with smiles. "My daughter, you've come." Just like when I was a child, I ran joyfully to them when they returned from a business trip, asking what gifts they had brought back for me. Clearly, my parents were right in front of me, yet I ran desperately, even losing my shoes, still unable to reach them. It felt as if they were getting further and further away from me. "Lora! Lora!" It seemed like there was a violent knocking at the door, each knock more urgent than the last. I was suddenly jolted awake by the sound, only to realize that the water in the bathtub was almost drowning my head. The knocking grew more intense, one knock after another, pounding on my heart and leaving me feeling somewhat anxious. The moment the bathroom door was kicked open by Troy, I finally managed to get dressed. The man's eyes were slightly red, his face boiling with anger. Why hadn't he said anything earlier? I knelt down trembling, apologizing, saying I hadn't heard just now, that it wasn't intentional. Troy was taken aback by my action, and after realizing it, he let out a cold snort. "What kind of trick is this?" trying to attract my attention with this? It's not unreasonable for him to be so suspicious. When I was pursuing him before, I spared no effort, including using the tactic of self-harm, even getting myself drunk, yearning for just a fraction of his attention. But this time it really isn't, I explained. I no longer dare to entangle Mr. Troy. Hearing this, he paused imperceptibly, and in the end, could only walk in front of me, trying to pull me up. Ah! The moment his hand touched me, I dodged away, collapsing on the ground and fiercely resisting the Troy in front of me. I was still very afraid of any physical contact with him. Seeing me like this, Troy furrowed his brow, his knuckles turning white. What happened to your hands? I had reacted too strongly just now and forgot to hide my hands. Troy looked at my fingers wrapped in bandages and realized something was wrong. I was scared and wanted to pull my hands back, but Troy's brow furrowed even tighter. What are you doing? I could only huddle in the corner like a quail, remaining silent. After a long while, the family doctor arrived, unwrapping the makeshift bandages and looking at my hands with sympathy. Troy stepped forward and rolled up my sleeve, revealing the shocking scars. Some were from being pinched with nails, some from cigarette burns, and others from being whipped with a belt. Lora, did someone in prison bully you? Why didn't you tell me? For the first time, Troy, who has always been able to strategize in the marketplace and remain unflinching in the face of any difficulty, spoke with a tremor in his voice. I only found it laughable. Wasn't this all caused by him? Aren't all my sufferings a result of his actions? Why does he show such an expression now? But 3 years of hellish life had made me timid and shrink back. I dared not retort to Troy, fearing he would throw me back into that hell. I could only humbly plead, I truly know I was wrong. I won't cling to Troy anymore. I want a divorce. I want a divorce. You still want a divorce? Troy's face was filled with anger. Slap. The crisp and loud sound of a slap echoed throughout the space as Troy's mother walked in and slapped him. Her voice barely concealed her anger. Divorce? You are forcing Lora to divorce you? How am I supposed to face Lora's parents after this? Do you know that when our family started our business, the first bit of startup capital was given by Lora's father? Our family has weathered many storms over the decades, and we have relied on the support of the Luo family. When they were in trouble, unfortunately, we were still able to reach out to help, but Lora's parents chose to jump off a building together to avoid dragging others down. I know that the Luo family parents were most worried about their 2 daughters, so our family must take good care of Lora and Vera, to honor the spirits of the Luo family parents in heaven. If I hadn't seen Lora so full of love for you, I wouldn't have let you marry her. Who would have thought this would end up harming her? Troy's mother pointed at Troy and scolded, Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? Lora's parents treated you so well, yet you can't even take good care of their daughter. Troy covered his face, his hair a bit disheveled, bowing his head and silently enduring his mother's hysterical scolding. In the end, Troy's mother was so exhausted that as she continued to scold, she only became angrier, nearly fainting from anger, and was helped back to her room by the servants. After the doctor had simply treated the various wounds on my body, I finally got to have dinner. This dinner was arranged by Troy, and it included cilantro and onions, which I had once despised but now regarded as treasures. Despite my efforts to restrain myself, I couldn't help but devour the food ravenously. After all, in prison, I could only eat spoiled or moldy food, and sometimes, when I was starving, I even scraped the wall for something to eat. Lora, how did you become like this? Concerned and gentle words floated in my ears. Upon seeing who had come, it was none other than my dear sister Vera. She must be quite pleased to see the once proud little princess of the Luo family in such a sorry state, eating as if I were a refugee from a century ago. Troy coughed and touched his nose while looking at me. Your sister heard that you were released from prison and came to see you. Vera, known for her disaster-level acting, brought out her best performance, looking at me with a face full of concern. Lora, have you been doing okay in prison? I ignored her, eating faster, while my sister continued to speak, saying that she didn't blame me for what happened back then. She knew I didn't mean it. I still didn't respond. Troy got angry. Lora, your sister cares about you so much, and you're silent? Don't you know how to reply? The bowl and chopsticks in my hand immediately fell to the ground, and I didn't have time to pick them up, only trembling as I apologized. I'm sorry, I won't dare to bother Troy again. I was afraid that if I took a second too long to apologize, Troy would retaliate against me. In Vera's eyes, a venomous and triumphant glint flashed. But she still showed understanding and said to Troy, "It's okay, I know my sister didn't mean it." She pretended to lecture Troy, saying, "Really, how can you be so harsh on Lora, who just got back from prison?" Then Vera added, "I haven't seen Lora in a long time, tonight I want to sleep with her and chat about sisterly things." Troy wouldn't allow me to refuse and agreed to Vera's request on my behalf. In the room, Vera came out wearing my pajamas. She hadn't brought any change of clothes today, so she asked, "Wearing a little of my sister's should be fine, right?" Although I felt extremely uncomfortable, I couldn't care less. My voice was hoarse as I asked, "Are you really my biological sister? Did I do something wrong? Why are you trying to frame me?" With only the two of us in the room, seeing me so straightforward, Vera revealed an unprecedented malice. She seemed to have heard the biggest joke in the world. "Why? You're asking me why?" She sneered, "Because your birth was the biggest mistake. Not only do you want to take a share of the family inheritance, but you also took away all of Mom and Dad's love. When I was young, I excelled in dance, piano, and etiquette, while my parents always favored you, who were unlearned and mischievous. As I grew up, I deliberately encouraged you to be spoiled and willful. My parents complied with your every whim, while I wanted to enter the entertainment industry, and they insisted that it was a big cesspool, refusing to let me mix in that world. I finally married into a wealthy family and had the upper hand over you in terms of men, but then the Luo family went bankrupt, I was kicked out of the high society, and you ended up marrying Troy. How could I not hate you?" My lips trembled. "Just because of this, you want to hurt your own sister?" Vera looked down at me with her hands clasped. "Yes, exactly because of this. By the way, you still don't know why Troy likes me, right? That's because I told him that I was the one who saved him when we were kids." In an instant, my pupils constricted, and I stood there in a daze. When I was young, I was once accidentally lost by my sister and fell into the hands of human traffickers, where I met Troy. Under the constant beatings and abuse from the traffickers, Troy and I huddled together for warmth, and it was during that time that I began to develop feelings for him. Later, we seized the opportunity to escape while the traffickers were drinking. At a critical moment, the traffickers' dog sensed us, and just as the dog was about to catch up, Troy unfortunately stepped into a trap. I went back to pull him out, but I was bitten by the dog. After Troy saw me get bitten by the dog, he lost his mind and killed the dog with a rock, and we managed to escape successfully. After we returned, I only told my sister about this, describing to her the bits and pieces of my time with Troy during those difficult days. When I grew up, my sister brought her classmates home to celebrate her birthday, and I immediately recognized Troy. I told him I was the little girl from back then, but Troy didn't believe me and said I was lying. It was only now that I understood my sister had taken credit for my achievements. The injustice of being framed and wronged by my sister surged into my heart, and I didn't know where the courage came from to slap her. My sister looked at me in disbelief, then ran out of the room. Soon after, my sister brought Troy over. "Lora, I thought you had learned your lesson in prison and would behave, but it turns out you are still as arrogant and domineering as before." Fury surged in Troy's eyes. "Aren't you going to ask me why I hit her? What else could it be? Bullying your sister for being tolerant and magnanimous?" He sneered. "Look, Troy will never listen to my explanation, he will only stab my heart with his sword again and again without distinguishing right from wrong. However, I no longer have the heart to explain to Troy, he won't believe me. Moreover, I have already let him go and just want a divorce to fulfill him and my sister. Troy, let's get a divorce." I once again stated my only request. "Lora, even when you're throwing a tantrum, there should be a limit." "I really am not throwing a tantrum, Mr. Troy, isn't divorce what you want? This is truly my only request." Troy clenched his fingers, word by word, gritting his teeth. Only I can bring up divorce with you. Who do you think you are to mention divorce to me? This sentence made my heart drop heavily, and my face turned pale in an instant. Troy, this man, is so elusive and unpredictable. Didn't he want to get rid of me long ago? Is it just because I was the one who brought up the divorce that he feels embarrassed? The divorce situation has no resolution for now, but I don't want to stay with Vera and Troy for even a second longer. So I left the Lee residence without any attachment, taking only an old phone with me. Holding the salary card given to me by the prison, the money inside is meager, but enough for me to stay in a cheap motel for one night. This simple room may be basic, but at least no one will drag me by my hair to the toilet in the middle of the night, which gives me a sense of relief. I was awakened by the sound of my phone ringing. Instinctively, I answered the call, and Troy's mocking voice came through. Aren't you wanting a divorce? Get to the address I sent you in 20 minutes. I'm here with the divorce agreement waiting for you. Hearing this, I was overjoyed, even forgetting to tie my shoelaces as I cried and laughed like a madwoman. When I hurriedly took a taxi to the address Troy had given me, I looked up and felt a sense of familiarity. Isn't this the bar that Troy loved to frequent 3 years ago? I never expected that after 3 years, he still cherished this place. Before I could figure out why we were signing the divorce agreement here, I was led into a private room. Even though the room was dimly lit, I recognized Troy sitting on the sofa, pouring himself drink after drink, his expression somewhat lonely and desolate. When he saw me come in, he put down his glass, and his dark eyes fixed intently on me. Lora, I'm asking you one last time, do you really want a divorce? I answered without hesitation, yes, I want a divorce. He frowned. Just because you were in prison for 3 years and I didn't visit you, you want a divorce? Besides this, I really can't think of any other reason you would dare to bring up divorce recklessly. I shook my head. My heart had already died since you sent me to prison 3 years ago. His frown deepened. Even if you were Troy's wife, you must accept the punishment for your mistakes. See, he will never believe me, even though I have said 1,000 times that I did not push my sister down the stairs. I no longer want to waste my breath refuting my sister's accusations. I just want to get away from this man who has tormented me so much. Troy, please have mercy and divorce me. I can leave with nothing. As I spoke, the glass fell to the ground, making a crisp sound. I was startled and instinctively knelt down, repeatedly bowing my head. I'm sorry, I was wrong, please let me go. When I first entered the prison, I still retained the pride of the little princess of the Luo family, but under the lessons from those people, my dignity had long since vanished. As soon as they showed a hint of impatience, I would kneel and apologize. However, Troy found my state amusing and said, Lora, if you want a divorce, go ahead. He suddenly said, but tonight you have to accompany me. The word struck me like a bolt from the blue, leaving me stunned in place as I looked at Troy in disbelief. He hated it when I clung to him. We had known each other for 10 years, and he had never taken the initiative to touch me. I was so shocked that my tone became stammering. What did you just say? But Troy suddenly lifted my chin gently with his long fingers, his breath warm against my ear as he said, you will sleep with me for one night. After knowing you for so long, I suddenly want to taste you. Weren't you the one who used to beg me for this? When I confirmed that I hadn't misheard, I felt as if I had fallen into an ice cellar. Why would he come to humiliate me like this when I hated him the most? 2 lines of clear tears slid down my cheeks. I'm sorry, but aside from this, I can agree to everything else. Please, let me go. Aside from this relatively clean body and soul, I have nothing. I'd rather die than have a relationship with Troy. Ha ha ha. Troy suddenly burst into laughter. Do you really think I want you? He suddenly released my chin, looking very disdainful. I just wanted to test if you still had those dirty thoughts about me. After saying that, he took out a document and handed it to me. I trembled as I took the document, and when I saw the long-desired words, divorce agreement, I breathed a sigh of relief, my body crashing heavily onto the cold floor. When I woke up again, the person in front of me was actually Soren. My pale lips parted slightly. What are you doing here? Soren rubbed his tired brow. Troy asked me to take you away. He explained that after discovering I had fainted from low blood sugar, he immediately took me to the hospital. The doctor, seeing the wounds on my body, mistakenly thought he was an abusive boyfriend and almost called the police. But Soren firmly denied that he was my partner and strongly insisted that the doctor conduct a full physical examination on me, keeping a record of my scars. In the end, the doctor believed his explanation. I gratefully wanted to get up from the bed to thank him, but he pressed me back down, looking at me seriously. After suffering so much in prison, what you need most now is to rest well. I opened my mouth to express my gratitude, but no words came out. Finally, I couldn't help but ask, why are you helping me? We've been arch enemies since childhood, often arguing and bickering, so I really can't think of a reason for your help. Soren handed me his lawyer's practicing certificate, speaking casually, I want to thank you for always arguing with me. Every time we had a debate, you would provoke me into signing up, which sparked my interest in defense. Then I successfully switched majors and got into law school. He continued, I originally wanted to go back home to thank you properly, but I didn't expect. He suddenly paused, staring at me seriously. As soon as I returned home, I saw the news of your release from prison. The Lora I know, though arrogant and overbearing, is definitely not the kind of malicious person who would harm others. You didn't push Vera down the stairs, did you? Tears instantly surged from my eyes, my world plunged into darkness, suddenly illuminated by sunlight. I never expected that there were still people in this world who believed in my innocence. I nodded vigorously, my tone firm, yes, I did not push Vera down the stairs. Soren smiled sincerely, then will you trust me and let me help you clear your name? My tears flowed uncontrollably as I choked out my response, I believe you, I believe. In the days that followed, I temporarily stayed at Soren's house. He said that as my attorney, he needed to be thoroughly familiar with every detail of the case, and living at his place would make it easier for us to discuss the possibilities of an appeal and exoneration. At his home, I was taken care of meticulously. Whenever I wanted to do something for him, like cleaning the house, he would always hurriedly stop me, Lora, don't move, let me do it. I don't want to pay for your medical expenses again if you accidentally get hurt. After learning about my experiences in prison, he invited a senior from Harvard whom he met on the flight back home, a psychology major. She often accompanied me, providing psychological support and guidance. Through conversations with her and psychological counseling, I gradually began to emerge from the shadows of my mind. Life gradually became better and better. With the support and encouragement of Soren and the senior, the light of hope was reignited within me. I knew that with them by my side, I would surely be able to clear my name and start a new life. We had just sent Vera a lawyer's letter suing her for framing and defamation, and she immediately lost her composure and asked to meet with me. In the cafe, we sat facing each other. I calmly looked at Vera, you received the lawyer's letter, right? As long as you apologize to me now and confess, I can write you a letter of understanding. After all, Vera is my sister, and I believe our parents in the afterlife would not want to see their daughters turn against each other. I will give her one last chance. But my mercy was clearly unnecessary. Upon hearing my concession, Vera not only showed no remorse or regret but instead became even more aggressive. Her twisted expression made her once charming face appear ugly, just like her inner self. Apologize? How ridiculous. Do you think a mere lawyer's letter can fool me? I played that game to death hundreds of years ago when I was a star. I couldn't help but clench my fists. Vera truly was incorrigible. So what if I said that the nanny who testified for you back then is willing to change her statement for me? What did you say? Upon hearing this, Vera's expression clearly stiffened for a moment. Immediately, as if she thought of something, she regained her composure and retorted, Sister, you still don't know, do you? The eyewitness from back then has long taken my money and flown far away. Before I could respond, my sister continued, By the way, you must be having a hard time in prison, right? That's because I bribed both the guards and the inmates. The worse you suffer, the better their families can live. So it was Vera, she had bribed those people to teach me a lesson. The suffering I endured actually came from this blood-related sister, and Vera was even more malicious than I had imagined. Now, when I think back to the days and nights of torment in prison, my body still trembles involuntarily. The moment the cruel truth was revealed, the last shred of compassion I had for my sister vanished into thin air. Rage tore at my nerves. Even though I caught a glimpse of the man's clothing out of the corner of my eye, I still stood up and slapped Vera across the face with a swift motion. As expected, Vera fell into Troy's arms, who had rushed over just in time. Troy gripped my wrist tightly, his anger barely concealed in his eyes. "Lora, isn't this lesson enough? Are you going to bully your sister again?" Vera also played her part of the weakling well, covering her face and sobbing in Troy's embrace. "Troy, I'm fine, really." Troy was clearly taken in by this act, his tone was firm. "Lora, apologize. Apologize to your sister, do you hear me?" Before I could say anything, Soren, who had been hiding in the corner watching this drama unfold, stepped out and pulled me away from Troy. He held me protectively in his arms, coldly staring at the two in front of him. "Mr. Troy, if you're blind, go see an eye doctor. Which eye of yours saw Lora bullying that green tea?" Troy was choked by Soren's words, angrily looking at me and Soren. "Lora, you really are something. It's only been a short time since the divorce and you're already daring to put a green hat on me?" I retorted, "Troy, you should take care of yourself first. You were involved with my sister while still married, and now you come to meddle in my affairs as your ex-wife?" Troy didn't expect that I, once his devoted follower, would stand up to him for another man. The air was silent for a few seconds, and just as he was about to explode with anger, Soren and I had already walked away, leaving him with just his back. After we were completely out of Troy's sight, Soren asked, "Did you bring the recorder?" I nodded. In the days that followed, Soren and I continued to gather evidence, preparing for a strong comeback in court. Although recordings made without the consent of the parties involved cannot be presented as evidence, we did not overlook any detail or clue, working hard to find leads based on the recordings and investigating the backgrounds of all related individuals. Just when Soren and I were feeling confident about the upcoming lawsuit, a sudden fire pressed the pause button on everything. I woke up from the hospital bed, and instead of Soren, I saw Troy, with dark circles under his eyes and a scruffy beard. Recalling the image of Soren stumbling as he carried me out of the fire, my mind went blank. But Troy leaned in closer, his eyes red, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "You are Lora from back then, right?" I ignored him, screaming frantically, "Soren, where's Soren?" I grabbed Troy by the collar. "Where is Soren? Hurry, take me to Soren. He is my comrade in arms and the key to my vindication, so he must be safe." Seeing my frantic state, Troy's reddened eyes dimmed. "Do you care that much about Soren?" I pounded on the man in front of me. "Give Soren back to me, give him back." Troy silently endured my hysterical outburst. Seeing that I couldn't move anymore, he trembled and cautiously looked at me. "Lora, can we not talk about Soren anymore? Can you give me another chance?" Chance? I looked at the humble Troy before me, and it was just like the way I used to beg him for a glance. But I only felt it was utterly ridiculous. Why should I give you a chance? Do you know everything I endured during those 3 years in prison? Troy nodded, sobbing uncontrollably. I know everything. When you first arrived in prison, you were still that arrogant little princess of the Luo family. Those people dragged you by your hair and forced you down to the toilet to intimidate you into submission. They made you lie on the ground and bark like a dog to please them, trampling on your dignity. Later, you learned to obey, doing everything they said, yet they still tormented you in new ways every day, using cigarette butts to draw on your skin, watching you scream in agony as you were shocked with electric rods, using toothpicks. Stop it. I covered my head and plugged my ears, interrupting his words. Every word he said undoubtedly danced on my wounds, deepening my heart-wrenching pain. I pushed him away with all my strength, curling up in the corner. "Half of my suffering is thanks to you. I never want to see you again. Get out. Just get out." I threw everything I could reach at Troy. Troy didn't dodge, If this could make you feel a little better, then go ahead and hit me, curse me to vent. But... Troy's voice choked. Lora, can you turn around and really look at me? With red eyes, I squeezed out 2 words through clenched teeth, I can't. It was at that moment that Soren walked into the hospital room. Seeing the unharmed Soren, I jumped out of bed in joy. Soren, you're okay. Before the court hearing even began, news came that my sister had turned herself in. I was preparing to pick up Soren to celebrate, but just as I arrived at the law firm, I was stopped by Troy. I took a step back, avoiding him as if he were a plague, just like he had done to me when I was released from prison. Seeing my attitude, Troy's pupils contracted, and a hint of vulnerability flickered in his eyes. Lora, do you really not want to see me? I frowned at him. Mr. Troy, if this is about remarrying, let's not discuss it. During this time, I had been thoroughly annoyed by his harassment. He would show up every few days in a well-tailored suit, holding flowers, begging me to remarry him. With each proposal I rejected, my disdain for him skyrocketed. Troy lowered his gaze in disappointment and shook his head gently. This time it's not about remarrying. I won't bother you again. I just came to tell you some good news. I remained indifferent. I already knew that Vera had turned herself in. Aren't you curious why she suddenly turned herself in? I hesitantly voiced my guess. What methods did you use on her? Troy's expression instantly relaxed. My Lora is so clever, she could guess this. Although she has a confession that could lead to a reduced sentence, due to framing and bribing prison guards and inmates, she was still sentenced to 15 years for multiple crimes. By the way, I've already instructed that those people who bullied you in prison should suffer as much as your sister did. Hearing about Vera's fate, my heart felt like still water. Everyone must take responsibility for their actions. Since Vera dared to do this back then, she should be mentally prepared to face the consequences. Well, Vera's fate is what she deserves, nothing more. I'll take my leave now. Just as I was about to leave, Troy handed me a document. Lora, this is the property transfer agreement. The previous marriage was my fault, and I've decided to leave everything to you. I paused, looking at Troy with a complex expression, unsure of how to react. Troy firmly shoved the document into my hands. Take it, you deserve this too. With that, he turned to leave. Wait. I called out to him from behind. He stopped, a look of joy on his face, turning back to look at me expectantly. But I only asked the last question in my heart. How did you suddenly decide that I am the Lora from your childhood? Troy's gaze dimmed instantly, and he stammered, because after the fire, I accidentally caught a glimpse of the bite mark on your calf in the hospital. That was the injury Lora got when she was bitten by a dog while trying to save me. Dismissing the last doubt in my heart, I sighed. It's quite ironic, knowing each other for 10 years, married for 3, and you only just now noticed the scar on my calf. He opened his mouth to speak but fell silent. After a long time, he finally said, I'm sorry, I've neglected you all these years. I did not accept this belated apology. I simply handed him a tissue from my bag, saying, wipe your tears, I'm leaving. 6 months later. Time slowly eased my pain, and I successfully applied for an opportunity to study at a prestigious university abroad. I prepared to return after completing my studies, hoping to use knowledge and the weapon of law to help more women like me who have suffered in silence in their marriages, wishing to assist them in breaking free from their misfortunes with my modest efforts. Inside the airport, people came and went, bustling and lively. I dragged my suitcase toward the security checkpoint, filled with anticipation for the life ahead. Wait a minute. A familiar voice called out to me. It was Soren Sr. She ran up to me, panting, her eyes filled with anticipation and surprise. She came here today to tell you something important. In her following words, Soren's feelings for me were revealed like a secret uncovered, showing that his love for me was so deep and enduring, silently guarding me from childhood to now. He's just a coward. The senior said with a smile, clearly giving so much without asking for anything in return. Do you know? He decided to study law diligently after hearing about you by chance while abroad, and after finishing all his courses ahead of time, he rushed back to help you. Also, on the night you fainted at the bar, he almost got into trouble for helping you deal with your ex-husband. Hearing this, my heart couldn't help but tremble slightly, like a gentle breeze brushing over green grass, filled with gratitude for Soren. Thank you for telling me this. I looked deeply at my senior, but, seeing the glimmer of hope and expectation in her eyes, I knew she thought there was a chance. But as I gently shook my head, that light gradually dimmed. After a failed marriage, I realized. I said seriously and firmly, that what is more tragic than a miserable marriage is always focusing on men. This time, I want to live for myself, rather than spinning around one man after leaving another. Looking through the glass at the vast sky outside the airport, there are countless possibilities waiting for me above that expanse, so please tell him that while love is beautiful, it is not everything. In the disappointed yet understanding gaze of my senior, I handed her a bank card. Please tell him that I am very grateful for everything he has done, and tell him. After pausing for a moment, I continued, tell him that there are things more important than love waiting for me to do. Troy gave me all the marital assets, but money is not the only thing for my future growth and pursuits. I decided to divide it into 3 parts, to thank Soren, to support charity, and to fund my own study abroad. This way, I can repay those who helped me when I was most isolated and also empower myself to go further and help those in need. Each of us has the right to choose our own way of life and the goals we pursue. I will not stagnate because of the suffering in prison. Instead, I will gradually accept it and then find my direction and what I want to strive for. In this world, nothing is more important than being a true self. I know the road ahead is still long, but I am not afraid because I believe that as long as I bravely take that step, a new life will open its arms to me.